Okay, so today the presentation will be continuing on talking about philosophy. Last week we heard about the 5 proofs for God according to St. Thomas Aquinas, and so that's who we're really drawing from. The philosopher we're looking to is St. Thomas. We see St. Thomas here. So I'm going to talk about the resurrection of the body as much as I can using philosophy. And so I'm going to start that off really with talking about substance, nature, form, and matter. You kind of heard these things last week, but maybe you didn't quite understand them, or maybe you did. So I'm going to kind of go through those with my basic definitions. So these are my definitions of what these things mean. Substance, a thing that exists in itself. So anything that can exist in itself is really a substance. So this chair, the table, our cell phones, of course, but then you kind of get to higher substances like animals, plants, humans. So that's what a substance is. Anything that can be contained in itself, and philosophically, that's what we call a substance. Nature defines what a substance is. So then we can look at things and say, okay, if we're talking about a chair, you know, it has 4 legs, or people sit on it, it has a back on it, all these type of things. You define what that thing is. It's sort of a universal thing that all substances belonging to a particular group have. For animals, we would call that a species, or for plants, you know, you can look at a certain plant and you know it has this type of leaf, it grows in this way, it has this type of seeds, so this must be this type of plant. So that's how we know nature. So we know human nature because we see that we all have something that unites us. Well, many things that unite us, so we know there's a human nature. Form, that is the principle that actualizes the matter. So what's that mean? That means that is sort of the thing that gives the matter, allows it to actually exist. And so for humans, of course, is to spoil it. I'm going to tell you it's our soul, right? That is our form. You've probably heard that last week. But it's whatever gives the sort of the matter its moving principle, its actualization, makes it what it is. So that's form, right? And so we talk about form, or you hear form, that's what it means. It's a principle, it's not really a thing, and usually it's immaterial. So it's a soul or some other principle that gives a thing its movement. And then matter is the material needed for a substance to exist. So I kind of broke the rule of defining. I kind of used the term in a way in the definition, but it's basically what is needed for something to exist. So for humans to exist, you know, both the mom and the dad give something, and then what comes about is the matter necessary for a human soul to exist in that matter and to create a human being. And so it's whatever exists there to actually make that substance what it is. So these are what these terms mean. I don't want these to confuse you. But these are kind of your basic philosophical terms, and the way we're using it is really taken from Aristotle, and that's how St. Thomas Aquinas uses them. He takes them really from Aristotle. So this is what we'll be talking about. Okay, so I'm using, Mr. Vyatt used a dog, so I'm going to use a cat, okay? The opposite, because I'm a cat person, only in that cats don't want to be around you, and that's the type of pet that I want. A pet, yes, so I'm not a lovey-dovey type of pet owner, so I need a pet who doesn't want to be around me. That's why I like cats. And so the substance, right? We have this substance, we have the cat here, this particular cat, and then we have the nature of cats, right? So some biologist or some child studying this creature would say, okay, what are cats like? They do this and this and this, right? They meow, they have fur, all these different things. They have claws, and so they're tiny, they're not big like lions. And so that's how they would define the nature of a cat. And then what is the form of a cat, right? So animals have souls, like we have souls, animals also have souls. They don't have souls like we do, but the form of this cat is that it has, we're going to learn about this, it has an animal soul. And so that's what gives its moving principle. And then, of course, its matter is it has, just like humans, it has to get from the mother cat and the father cat the material necessary to create a new life. And so that's what makes this cat come about, is that the matter is made in the womb of the mother cat, and then a new cat life comes about. So This kind of using a animal as an example of those four things that we talked about. Substance, this cat is a substance. Its nature is that it's a cat. Form is that it has an animal soul. The matter is the material we see in front of us needed to make this cat exist, okay? And to recognize that natures are universal. So none of us is the sole human nature, right? We each have human nature in us. Substances are singular, right? A substance is an individual or a single thing, okay? So that's what those things help us to understand. Okay, so it's going to help. I'm telling you this because it's going to help us to get into what is the soul. So this is, oh, go ahead, yes.
I just want to understand on the, I think it's the form.
Yes.
And how does that relate to inanimate objects?
That was good. So some inanimate objects are, so I don't ever, like some people talk about chairness or stuff like that. I don't really like talking about composite beings or like a table or something because it's made up of parts. But, St. Thomas would say that the form of sort of inanimate things, there is something there moving it. And so it's not a soul, but it is something there. And so I don't know if I can define it that well because that's not really something I'm the best at. Like some people call it, like a rock, it would be, well, that'd be more the nature, like rockness or something. But they don't, we see that, that's a good question because you see that separates, so what has a soul from what doesn't have a soul. And so it really is kind of different when we talk about the form of things, of uncreated things. So I'll think about that and maybe try to give a better answer at the end. So what is the soul? So this is an image of the souls in purgatory, souls in heaven. Right, because souls in purgatory, they don't have bodies, they're souls. So they're souls experiencing purgation, being purified. That's why I use that. So what is a soul, right? We know we have souls in heaven, we have souls in purgatory. Sadly, we have some souls in hell, and we have souls, of course, on earth. What is the soul? So it's actually three types of souls, okay? So some people know this, some people don't. I didn't know this until seminary, okay? And so three types of souls. There's a vegetative soul. So I have a cactus there, one of my favorite plants. And so the cactus has a soul, okay? So your tree outside, it has a soul. So you should be nice to it, okay? But it's different, of course. It's not like our soul, okay? And so the vegetative soul, those are the powers that allow the plant to grow, right, to have nutrition, so photosynthesis or whatever it uses. It's these moving powers that aren't like what we do. We do have these powers in us. We have the vegetative powers in us because we want nutrition, we grow. That's really all the plant has, right? It doesn't have the things that we'll see in the other animals as well as humans. So plants do have souls, and St. Thomas really highlights this because he says that it's not just a biological process, and this is back in the Middle Ages, right? So they didn't really have the biology we do. But it's basically saying it's not just a biological process that makes them grow, that makes them want nutrition. There's something else there motivating them, right? Because how you brought up sort of inanimate objects don't operate in that way. So you think about the sun, and I'll show my ignorance because I forget which gas is turning to which gas. But there's one gas in the sun being turned into another gas, okay? The scientists know what those gases are. We talk about stars dying, right? So our sun will die whenever it's no longer able to make this changing of the gases, right? But it's not the same way as a plant dying, okay? It's just the saying that the sun no longer has the gases necessary to make itself shine brightly. And so when we talk about inanimate objects, it's different from talking about living beings, okay? So St. Thomas observes that. He says that when we talk about living beings, there's something else there. It's not just simply a biological or chemical thing that's making it react the way it is. And so that's the vegetative soul, is the first type of soul. Second is the animal soul. We have our cat there again. And so what is in this animal soul? So this is a lot of things that we have, where people sometimes get humans confused with other animals, which we are like other animals, but of course we have something more. But the animals do have a lot of things that we have, right? And so it's all the senses, the sense perceptions, that animals can actually make judgments, natural judgments. St. Thomas talks about, running away. He says that sheep know to run away from wolves, so they can make judgments. They even have memory is also in this soul, property. So animals have memories, right? We know that they have memories. They can remember things. That is unique to those things that have animal souls. But there's a lot of other things that go in there, but it's a lot of the sense perceptions where we're allowed to react in a way that plants cannot. The animals can react to things in a way that plants can't. And finally, there's rational soul. So I have Pope Francis there because he has a rational soul, like all of us. And so I thought, which human should I use? I use good old Pope Francis. So what is in the rational soul? One thing St. Thomas says in Summa Contra Gentiles, that's one of his writings, he talks about sort of the levels of life. And he talks about the most perfect level of life. He says, so the highest, most perfect level of life is that of the intellect. For intellect can reflect upon itself and understand itself. Sometimes it's hard to really convince some people that humans are different than other animals, right? And so that's the thing that I always like to go to, is that humans can reflect upon ourselves. Dogs can't do that. That's the one that's always kind of hard to really get people to see there's a difference. But dogs can't reflect upon themselves. Like a dog doesn't sit there and say, man, I remember when I was a puppy and, I bit my owner. That was bad. They don't do that, okay? Maybe they feel some level of, they know they've done wrong, but they don't reflect upon their lives. And understand itself, right? Dogs they can't comprehend the nature of being a dog, right? They know other dogs from their senses, from what they see, but they can't sit there and write a book about what it means to be a dog, okay? Or my life as a dog. Dogs don't do that. So they can't understand themselves. The human mind can do that. And so St. Thomas, though, and this is going to be important for later on, he says the human mind, even though it can come to self-awareness, must still start by knowing outside things, and they can't be understood without sense images. He says this because the levels of life don't end with humans, right? You have to go to the angels or spiritual beings who are more perfect, but then the most perfect, of course, would be God. And so angels, just to throw this out here real quick, angels know themselves sort of automatically. So as soon as God created them, they knew. They knew 2 + 2 is 4. They didn't have to learn it. They know all the things we know, they knew immediately, okay? But we don't learn in that way. We don't learn like the angels. We have to grow in our knowledge. So we have to teach a child, these 2 apples combined with those 2 apples give you 4 apples, okay? And then the child grasps that. That's understanding abstract universals. Again, animals cannot do that. A dog cannot do math, okay? A dog can never understand that 2 dog treats plus 2 more dog treats will get them 4 dog treats. They only want the treats. They don't care how many it is. They just want them, okay? But they'll never understand that 2 + 2 = 4. But we can understand that. But again, we have to learn that through our senses. The child sees it. The child hears it. The child can touch maybe the apples and put them over there. Like, oh, now I have 4 apples. I get that. That's how we have to learn. So we do have a more perfect level of life in our intellect and our rational souls, but we have to understand that we still have to learn through our bodies. Again, that's going to be important when connecting the soul to the resurrection. So again, our 3 levels, vegetative is just really nutrition, and I'll go to the next slide because it kind of shows that. It's really nutrition, reproduction, growth. The next one is mobility and sensation, all the sense perceptions. And then the last one being thought, reflection with the rational soul that only we can do properly on this earth. There's no other created being in the physical realm that we know of that can do this but human beings. So St. Thomas really wants to emphasize those 3 souls, because that kind of helps us understand something about the rational soul, because I kind of took it for granted when I was doing this presentation, but one thing I have to explain about the rational soul is that it is immortal, right? The others are not. So this is where the sad part, where people ask about their pets and where they go, and then you have to give them the sad answer. It's based on philosophy, so don't get mad at the priest. Get mad at Aristotle, okay? Or St. Thomas. But, the vegetative soul is not immortal, right? Because, it's connected to that physical plant. So whatever that plant is, once that plant dies, that soul does not continue on. Same for the sensitive souls. Sadly, when our animals pass away, they pass away. But this soul here, this rational soul, is different. It exists in a different way. And so this soul goes on. That's going to be important for us as we talk about the soul and the resurrection. Okay, so what is the soul? So what he does is, and this is taken from his public disputation on the soul. And what St. Thomas does, he usually asks a question, because that's what they used to do. They would ask these questions, and then they would publicly answer them. But there was always some sort of objections to that question, and then the master or whatever would then respond to those objections. And so the question he's answering here is, can the human soul be both a form? So remember what I explained to you about form. It's a thing that helps a being to be actualized. And itself a thing. Okay, so this is what St. Thomas is asking. Can the human soul be both a form and itself a thing? So this is one of the objections that he's going to respond to. It says, for if human soul is itself a thing, then it subsists and has complete existence in its own right. So if it's a thing, then it means that in our bodies, it means our soul is basically its own substance, right? And so that's what this is saying. Now, anything attached to something after it has complete existence is attached incidentally, as whiteness or clothing is attached to human beings. So body joined to soul will be joined to it incidentally. If the soul is itself a thing, it isn't the substantial form of the body. So this argument is saying that the soul can't be the form of the body if it's its own thing. So it would kind of mean that maybe we have a soul substance in our body, and then also a sort of material substance in our body. But we know that's not the case. And then St. Thomas, kind of going against that, and this is where I take this quote from, he says, what decides a thing's species is the form characteristic of it. But what makes human beings human is reason. Okay, again, that's what makes us human. We can reason, the other animals cannot. There's always Coco the monkey, who my professor, I don't know if you ever heard of Coco the monkey. She could do sign language or something, but my professor would go on rants against Coco the monkey. So Coco the monkey does not have reason, okay, just to know that. Their characteristic form is a soul that reasons. So our characteristic is that we have souls that can reason. That's what separates us from the other animals. That's why we can have dominion, kind of jumping into theology. That's why we can have dominion over the other animals, because we can reason. But since, as Aristotle says, understanding needs no bodily organ, the human soul can act in its own right, and so must be able to subsist in its own right as itself a thing. So the human soul is itself both a thing and a form. So we'll find that with St. Thomas, you've heard that. He's always kind of both and. And people say that about the church. The church is always both and, not either or a lot of times, okay? And so St. Thomas is saying it's both a thing and it's the form of the body, okay? Because it's a thing because it's not dependent upon the body for its existence. And then he says that it's a form because without it, basically the body or the human person would not exist as a human person. So it's both a thing and it's also a form. Skip on to that one. This is kind of where he summarizes the answer. So our conclusion is that soul is itself a thing in the sense of being able to subsist by itself, but one which does not possess a complete specific nature of its own. So remember, nature is what a thing is. So it's not like we have two natures. We don't have the soul nature in our bodies and then also the material nature, right? The body nature. Again, there's only one person who walked on this earth who had two natures, and that was Jesus Christ, okay? Because he had a divine nature and a human nature. We don't have two natures, we have one. But one which does not possess a complete specific nature of his own. Rather, it is something which completes a human being's specific nature by being the form of a human body, so that the soul is at one and the same time a form and itself a thing. So it's a thing in that it doesn't depend on the soul for its existence, but it's also a form because, in a sense, it does need the body. And we'll get to that soon. Okay. So then he starts responding to a lot of the arguments. There's he goes up to like 17 or 18, but I'm not going to go through each one. But he then goes to start responding to a lot of the arguments of why the soul would be basically a substance or its own nature. But one of the questions that is important, or one of the answers that's important to our topic today, is to number 7. One of the objections was, and this is to number 7. So St. Thomas says, the soul is joined to a body for its own perfection, both its essential perfection, the completion of its species, and a supervening perfection, the knowledge it draws from the senses, for this is a human being's natural mode of understanding. So I have that one here. So the perfection of the soul. So this is what's important about understanding that the soul is the form of the human person and gives sort of life or actualization to our material body, the material being we have. Because St. Thomas says that basically for the soul to reach its own perfection, it has to be in the body. Okay, so for our souls to truly be perfect, they have to have a body to experience things, because that's how we experience. Remember I told you the angels don't experience things through touching and seeing. They don't need to do that. We have to touch. We have to see. That's how we gain knowledge. We draw knowledge from our senses. And that's where we're similar to the other animals. But again, we then can go further and make these abstractions and understand universals, right? So we can study the animals. We can study mathematical concepts in a way that animals can't. We can understand what a circle is or what a square is. Animals can't do that. And so, but we have to do that through our senses, or else we won't be able to do that. So the perfection of the soul is found when there's a body-soul composite in the human being. Because we're a body-soul composite. The technical word for that is holomorphism. And don't, feel like, oh, I can't believe that word was thrown out there. I didn't remember that word until I went through my notes today. So I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that word, holomorphism. It means that in our bodies, the body and soul are one. Okay, so we're not two different things, it's both one. But we have to understand that our souls has its most perfect perfection in that it can understand through the senses. Continuing on with that, he talks about how the soul is joined to the body for its own perfection, both its essential perfection, the completion of its species, and I just read that one. So what this helps us to understand is that the soul really needs a body to have its perfection. And we have to really recognize that. And that's going to help us understand what the resurrection is. Here we go. All right, to objection 10. Here he's talking about the body decomposing, okay? He says, when body decomposes, soul doesn't lose the nature that enables it to be a form, though it is not actually perfecting matter as a form. What does that mean? What he's saying is that when a human person dies, the soul, because it's immaterial, because it's immortal, does not also go away. And it still has the ability to then give to some matter form, okay? So this is what then, in theology, of course, the soul either goes to purgatory or heaven or hell. But philosophically, it's saying that the soul will continue on, even when the body dies. And then St. Thomas even talks about how really what's decomposing is not so much the human body as it is the sort of parts that make up that body. What decomposes, properly speaking, is neither form nor matter nor existence, but the composite or formed matter, the thing. We talk of body having a decomposable existence, inasmuch as body through decomposition loses the existence it shared in common with soul, an existence which remains in the subsistent soul. So we say at funerals, right, this isn't that person anymore, this is their body. But even more than that, it truly is really not the person anymore, right? It was the body that they had on this earth, but now that body no longer has a soul, giving it, animating it, actualizing it. And so now it really is just kind of this decomposable matter in a way that it isn't a human being properly speaking. But of course, we still treat the body with reverence because it was a human being. That's why we respect the body. But St. Thomas is saying that the person lives on in their soul. They live on through their soul. Now, this is a really good thing here. This is St. Thomas talking about the soul. So this is in response, this is from another document where he talks about, it's actually a commentary on St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. St. Thomas has great commentaries. If you can ever read his commentaries, because you have to remember he was a priest, a very intelligent man, and so he had a deep understanding of theology. So if you can ever read his commentaries, they're really good on sacred scripture. But this one is on St. Paul. So this is he's commenting on 1 Corinthians 15, 17 through 19, and I'll read that for you. Sorry. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is vain. You are still in your sins. Then those who have fallen asleep in Christ have perished. If for this life only we have hoped in Christ, we are the most pitiable people of all. So we know St. Paul there is talking about the resurrection, that if we don't believe that there is a resurrection and that this is all we have, he kind of says that that's really sad. This is what St. Thomas Aquinas is talking about. Specifically, he's talking about the soul. So he says the union of soul and body is certainly a natural one. And any separation of soul from body goes against its nature and is imposed on it. So if soul is deprived of body, it will exist imperfectly as long as that situation lasts. Okay, so what he's saying is that it's natural for us to have both a body and a soul. That's human nature. That's what we are. We're a body-soul composite. But he says if the soul is deprived of the body, it exists imperfectly. So this is why I always say it that souls in heaven right now, they are not where God wants them to be. They exist in an imperfect state because they don't have their bodies, because we're not meant to be souls floating around for all eternity. And that's what St. Thomas is talking about. He's saying that this is an imperfect state of the soul. He says that it's imperfect as long as that situation exists. We can exist without our bodies because we have this soul that can continue on, that's immaterial, that's not dependent upon the body, but at the same time, we need our bodies to truly be whole. And he says that in this next line. Secondly, what human beings desire by nature is their own well-being. So we desire our well-being, right? This is sort of, we want good. We desire the good. St. Thomas talks about that. We want good for ourselves. But soul is not the whole human being, only part of one. My soul is not me. So that's the title of this chapter in the book that I took it from, which is really profound, right? That St. Thomas is saying, he's saying, my soul is not me. And so we have to recognize that. Our souls are not who we are. Our souls are only a part of who we are. That makes sense? Okay. Where am I at here? So that even if soul achieves well-being in another life, so even if our souls go to heaven, that doesn't mean I do or any other human being does. That's an even more profound statement, right? He's saying, like, even if my soul goes to heaven, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm in heaven. I mean, he is in heaven, but he's just making a point. Moreover, since it is by nature that humans desire well-being, including their body's well-being, a desire of nature gets frustrated. So that's really an important thing to understand about going to the resurrection. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I want you to chill.
It's the heat. It's killing me. But the body is really, it wants its well-being not only for the soul, or the human person, we want our well-being not only for our soul, we also want it for our bodies, right? Now, it's gone wrong throughout history. where you get people who really don't care about the body, and that really happens today still. All they really care about is the soul. And this is really kind of just a brief history of philosophy. This is kind of what Plato did, right? You've heard of Plato, one of the great philosophers. Plato only really cared about the soul, right? It was like the body was like something you wanted to escape for Plato. You wanted to leave the body behind, get out of it. And actually, St. Thomas quotes Plato, or kind of uses Plato when he's talking about this part. He says, this is why Plato believed in reincarnation. And Plato believed in reincarnation because he thought the soul can't really exist on its own. It needs a body. And so he just thought, well, once you die, it just finds a new body and goes into it. Okay, because Plato thought all the souls were already someplace and then they would just kind of zip down into a body. That's not what we understand about the soul. But that's what Aristotle will kind of then develop on, and then Aristotle will show, no, we're actually body-soul composites. We're not just a soul trying to get out of a body. Our body and our soul really are one thing, and that makes us who we are. So that's really what the Christian view of man and the soul is really kind of indebted to Aristotle, because in terms of philosophically understanding it, because we truly are body-soul composites, and so we desire the good not only for our souls, but we also desire the good for our body. This is why we treat our bodies well. Right? This is why Christian moral theology is not just about taking care of the soul, it's about taking care of the body. You treat your body well. You do good to it. You don't harm it. You respect it. You treat it as a temple of the Holy Spirit. Okay, that's getting into theology, but still, even philosophically, we can understand that our bodies deserve respect because this is truly who we are. It's not like we're trying to get rid of this nasty old thing that weighs us down. That would have been sort of the Platonic thought. But our thought is that, no, we want the good for our souls and our bodies. So that's what St. Thomas is really getting at. So this is kind of as far, even though this commentary on 1 Corinthians is really theology in a way, this is as far as philosophical thought can take us, right? Because everything else has to be taken up by really Christianity, okay, or Judaism. Because really all philosophy can say is that the body and the soul are one. The soul is immaterial. It's not dependent upon the body for its existence. So when a human person dies, the soul goes on. But philosophy doesn't really say what that going on is, right? You know, that comes from Christian theology and again, Judaism. But we know that the soul does continue on. But the way it comes in with the resurrection, where you can use philosophy for the resurrection, is that we know that our souls are not complete without a body. And so what it helps us to do is that most times things in Christianity, truths, dogmas, they will not contradict reason, okay? Our faith is reasonable. And so even though philosophy can't get us all the way to the resurrection and understanding what that means, if you talk about the resurrection, right, a reasonable person should say, you know what, that actually makes sense because I have a mortal soul. My soul can't be perfect unless it has a body. So it makes sense that I'll get my body back one day, okay? Do you see where philosophy and theology can kind of help each other out sometimes? And so this is what really St. Thomas is trying to get at to help us see that it's reasonable that we believe in the resurrection. Because sometimes people think that things we believe are unreasonable, okay, but they're reasonable. So when my teacher first taught me this is why it kind of blew my mind, because I was just like, wow, you know, he didn't say theology, he didn't mention one Bible quote. He just used philosophy. And so I thought it was profound for me. But this is what the Assumption of Mary is all about, right? That Mary, her body and soul, goes into heaven, of course, because Mary doesn't experience death like we experience death, okay? She didn't sin. So she gets to keep her body and her soul. And they're both in heaven. And so we can see again from that truth that we will experience the same thing one day. But the main thing is to know that we have our perfection, even our soul has its perfection in having a body, because we need a body to experience. I always also tell people that when we get our bodies back in heaven, we will experience heaven more intensely because we need bodies to experience. And so when our bodies come back to the resurrection, we will experience the joy of heaven with more, this like in an even greater way, because that's what God has given us. He's made us creatures who experience through the body. That's why we want our bodies back. But again, as St. Thomas said, my soul is not me. We are body and soul. That makes us human people or persons. And so without one or the other, it really truly isn't a human person. So those souls in heaven right now, they aren't really human persons. I mean, they're saints, but they aren't really people, properly speaking, until they get their bodies back. Now, Mary's a person, right? She is a human being right now, and Jesus in his humanity, he's a human being as well. But the other saints, they're simply souls waiting to get their bodies back. And so are the souls in purgatory, and the souls that go to hell as well will get their bodies back, because the Lord tells us that all of us will experience the resurrection at the end of time, because again, every human soul has to get its body back. It's just a truth. And the Lord says that in John's gospel. He says that in sacred scripture. And so this is really the importance of, again, using philosophical concepts to understand theology. And it can really help us to understand things, even though we can't get to the resurrection in terms of the theological talking about it. But we can at least get to a point where it's reasonable and we can understand that this is reasonable, right? This makes, I can grasp it through these concepts, and it really kind of does make sense. And so this is what St. Thomas was really trying to do here. And he wrote more about the resurrection, but at one point of his life, St. Thomas stopped writing because he had this vision, and so he stopped writing. And so when he died, they completed his Summa Theologiae, but they basically took different writings that he had or different talks he gave or lectures he gave. So I didn't use it because it was taken from that part, and that doesn't make that part any less than the other parts, but I thought I would just use the parts that he wrote and put him together himself. And the books that I used, well, I mainly used this one. We'll send these out. I used Aquinas' Selected Philosophical Writings, and it's a great book because it kind of just gives you different topics, and you can just find it and then go and see things. So one of the topics is God and himself. So it actually has those 5 proofs in here that Mr. Vyatt talked about. They're in here. Creation is God's doing. Did creation occur in time? There's some pretty interesting stuff in here. But he has all this. Soul in human beings. My soul is not me. There exists a God, God in his own existence. So you can get that book. But St. Thomas wrote a lot about different things that apply to our souls, different things that apply to our matter. And so, again, we have to understand who we are if we don't want to make mistakes, right? Because a lot of people, they have sort of Platonic thoughts about the body or other thoughts about the body that are wrong. Or again, we have people who just think that we're only a body and we're not a soul, right? And that we're just matter. And that all we are is just it's one movie that was made from a graphic novel where one of the main characters was like, oh, the atomical makeup of a dead and living body is the exact same, which is just basically saying that whether we're alive or dead, all we are is just matter. But that's an old philosophical view that just continues to kind of pop back up throughout time. And so this is the proper view of the body, that we are body and soul, and that the two go together, and they cannot be separated except for death. But we know that death cannot keep them separate forever, because God has promised to give us our bodies back at the end of time. That was the last one there. So are there any questions about anything I covered? Anything dealing with the resurrection? Yes.
So, how does that fit with, I don't remember exactly with the Bible, which book and chapter and all that, but Jesus meeting with, I remember, Moses and Abraham on top of a mountain, and the disciples said we're going to build tents and all that, because they apparently had bodies.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think they appeared with bodies, but they didn't have bodies. So, the saints appear to people, and they appear as they would have looked on earth, but of course they're not actually bodied yet. Right? But what does the Lord do when he appears, right? He starts eating, walks through walls, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah. But no, I don't think they actually had bodies. But that's also interesting because they would not have been in heaven yet either, because this was pre-resurrection. So they couldn't have been in heaven yet. So I don't know where they were, but well, they were in, Hades or whatever they call it, waiting. You had a question?
Yeah, it made me sad thinking about one of the things you said. But if we were to experience heaven more intensely
Mm-hmm.
once we receive our bodies, and you said that even souls in hell,
Mm-hmm.
they will experience hell
Oh yeah,
more intensely.
that's where I learned it was in Dante's Inferno. Yeah, Dante is with Virgil, and Virgil's guiding Dante, and then at one point that comes up where Virgil says that, yeah, the souls here will experience hell more intensely because they'll have their bodies back.
Okay, so according to St. Thomas, in order for the rational soul to achieve perfection, it has to be connected to a body.
Mm-hmm.
What would St. Thomas say to those that have bodies that, for one reason or another, are inhibited in their gaining of understanding through the senses? The blind, the deaf,
Mm-hmm.
those with intellectual disabilities that might inhibit their ability to understand through the senses.
Yeah, that's good. So they don't, they have the potential, but the potential is blocked for some reason. So it's not that, it's just the fact that we have rational souls. Because you got to think about, I always use the child in the womb, right? So we believe life starts at conception. The rational soul is there. It can't do the things that it will one day be able to do, but that doesn't make it any less of a rational human being. Any other questions? Well, thank you. Yes?
So where is the soul before it enters our body?
So Plato thought, like I said, that we were just souls waiting. But the Christian thought is that our souls are created at the moment of conception. So that's why we call it procreation, because the parents give the matter, but God gives the form. Because we can't create souls.
So the soul is created.
Yeah, anytime, I had a professor that said anytime the matter is there, so this is why the church is against cloning and in vitro fertilization and all these other methods that take it outside of the proper way, but in those methods, a soul is still created because anytime the matter is there for a human being, even if it's done immorally, God respects it. And so he lets that person be created, which shows you the beauty of life. And I always tell people, it's not the person that's sinful, it's the process. So, if a clone is created, the clone is not sinful. The process they created that clone with would be sinful. But that clone would be a human person. And God respects. So anytime the matter's there in the womb, whatever the biological process is, God respects it and a soul is placed there immediately, as soon as it's there.
Is the cloning only for humans? Like if they clone animals, is that?
Yeah, no, an animal that's cloned. Well, yeah, it's wrong to clone animals, I would think too, because it's not to the level of cloning a human, but it's still.
Taking away from the soul of that animal?
Yeah, it's just taking things out of its natural, format. Yeah. Good questions. Yeah.
So even the vegetative souls and the animal souls and the rational souls are going to heaven?
Well, you know what? They don't have immortal souls, so they don't properly go to heaven, animals and plants. But God says there'll be a new earth and a new heaven. Maybe he'll bring the animals and plants there too. I don't know.
I was gonna ask you, so all dogs don't go to heaven?
I would have thought that, but I've heard people argue other things, so.
Aborted souls will get their body?
Yes. Every human. Yeah. Even the ones that never really grew to the point of having, we don't know what that will look like, but they will get a body. They have bodies, they just don't have developed bodies. but they have them. The matter is there, right? Because as soon as we're created, everything that we'll ever need is there. It just takes time to develop, right? We know that from the genes and the DNA now, that everything that we need, which is kind of crazy to think about, but everything we need is right there until we leave this earth.
Does that pertain even actually lies and story? Like, so say somebody was blown up,
Mhm.
cremated, or like an abortion, so they just destroy the body.
Yeah, but the resurrected process will bring them back. And I should have looked that up. I meant to look that up, but St. Thomas talks about that at some point where he says, I think it was like an example of bodies that are kind of separated, maybe the saints, where the head's here and the arm's there. But the resurrection of the Lord will bring that all back together. People who are buried at sea, that's not going to stop the resurrection. They'll cremated remains. The Lord will make them whole again. Yeah. Yes.
So, if all souls will be called to heaven, regardless of what state, from conception to however old,
Mm-hmm.
how does that tie into non-Christian, to those who are not baptized, in that whole spectrum?
I mean, that could be a whole nother talk. Yeah, I remember there was a priest who, it was a daily mass. He got up there, and he talked about this, and it was like, you can't just get up there in a 2-minute homily and start, because it just sounded like he just started saying this stuff, and I was like, man, you have to give explanations. You can't just get up there or saying this person's going to heaven, this person. It sounded a little bit like if I wasn't someone who knew what he was talking about, I would have thought he was crazy, but he wasn't. But we know that the church is not, so Jesus Christ is not bound by his sacraments, right? So the easiest way to heaven is to be baptized. It is the easiest way to get to heaven. Okay, it really is the main way. I'm not say it's the only way, but it's practically the only way. But we know, for instance, babies who are born for whatever reason, they aren't baptized. So where do they go, right? And that's where limbo comes in, and then all these things. But now we kind of, limbo is not sort of the in vogue thing anymore. It's more that they, through God's mercy, will go to heaven. But the thing is that Jesus Christ can operate outside of his sacraments, but that's like the special way, okay? It's kind of like if you're in class and you do all your work, and your teacher, you do all your work, you're going to get the A, okay? But then there's that kid who just doesn't do the work and turns in assignments late. Teacher, well, I got to help this kid out, right? So he's got to give him some extra credit, you go and do this service project out, so there's all these extra things, but that's not the normal way to get the A. The teacher's having to do extra stuff for this person to get them to make a good grade. So the same with God, right? So God can work outside of his sacraments and help people get to heaven. But that's a really hard way. You have to be a morally good, upright person, right? And so think about how hard it is as Christians to live with this, we have the sacraments. So you think about other people, okay? So it's it's possible, but it's very difficult. So yes, other people who aren't Christians can get to heaven, but it's through God's grace, and it's very difficult. But we have to recognize that, they say that thing that salvation is through the church, right? Or there's no salvation outside the church, because the church is God's visible sacrament or sort of visible institution on earth. So anyone who's saved is properly saved through Jesus Christ and the church, even if they don't know it, because we can only get to heaven through Jesus. And so if anyone who goes to heaven, it will be through Jesus Christ.
So if you're a different religion, will you still go to heaven?
And it depends on if that person lives a life where they were good, and if they had the extra help of God's grace. It's always God who gets us to heaven. So the answer to that question is basically anyone who gets to heaven is through Jesus Christ, whether they know it or not. And there's no other way.
So the Jewish religion.
The Jewish people are a little different. But, they're different, but they're not. But in that, we do respect that they have the understanding of the one true God. They just have not accepted the Messiah. So But, even St. Paul talks about the Jewish people and how they still have this special relationship with God that will never go away. They'll always be the chosen people, forever. Yes?
This all makes me think about all these stories that you hear about people who get their near-death experiences and they go up to some place and they see relatives and even relatives that died before they were born. I'm thinking, well, what are they seeing?
Mhm.
They come back and poor boy describes a sister that he didn't know he had. Well, how does that happen if there's no body?
Yeah. I mean, you can have those experiences, and it could be a vision they were given, or it could be they actually went up to heaven. St. Paul says that he went up to the third heavens, or whatever, and talks about that. So you can see heaven, because heaven is there. We can go to heaven. Again, we just don't have our bodies yet.
I know, but like, what are these people seeing? They're saying they're seeing people they know.
Yeah, I mean, they could be actually seeing people they know. Yeah, they could be seeing family members who are already there. But again, sometimes it could just be a vision and not really the actual sight. Like St. John Bosco would have visions of hell, but people who were still alive were there, and it was more the kind of ways for him to warn them to live good lives. So sometimes it's a vision for a purpose and not just you seeing heaven or hell. So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I really want to make this point too with because people kind of have that question about can other people who are Christians go to heaven? And it's true that they can, but again, it's hard, but we know that it's possible. But it's not just that we believe in God because we want to go to heaven. We believe in God because it's the truth, right? And so people should want the truth. So it's not just a fact of like, oh, I want like this sort of, I just want all my desires to be fulfilled. No, it's like God is true, and so why would I want to believe anything else? And that's why faith is reasonable, right? Because we say this all-knowing God who created us out of love, like why wouldn't I want to serve him? And this is why people convert from other faiths or from being an atheist, because they recognize, man, I can't believe all this time I believe this, and this was the truth. And we see that all the time. I mean, the early converts, they were all Jewish, right? They were all Jewish Peter was Jewish, Mary was Jewish, they were all Jewish. And then the Gentiles, they were pagans, right? They worshiped the gods. They worshipped Zeus and all these other gods, Jupiter if they were from Rome. And they realized, like, this is not true. Zeus is not real. God is real. And so we see throughout time as Christianity spreads, it's because people recognize this is the way and there is no other way. And so they believe and accept the truth. And so that's the beauty of Jesus Christ, though, is that Jesus can, in his mercy, save people who don't even know him or maybe who are in another faith. But that's through his charity, through his mercy. It's not because they deserve it, it's because he chooses to grant them his mercy. So we have to remember that, right? Because again, we have to recognize the faith. We believe in a God who is real and true, and we want other people to accept the truth. Not in some sort of triumphant way, but it's like, why wouldn't I want other people to know the truth? If this is the real God, everyone should know him. That's why Christianity is a religion that evangelizes. Right? Judaism is not. Like you have to you're born into it or you convert to it. The Jewish people aren't trying to spread the faith. Okay, it's like it's a national sort of religion spread through their descendants. And other faiths are like that too. It's not really so much about spreading it. It's just about if people want to believe it, okay. But Christianity is not that way. It's like no, we want people to convert to our faith because this is the truth, and the Lord has told us to go out and spread the good news. Well, thank you all. Next week will be the Big Bang and the creation of the universe, which is very interesting and one of my favorite topics. So I hope you all will come to that. It'll be Dr. Cheryl White. She has a lot of knowledge on that, and so please come out and see her talk on that topic. And thank you all for coming today. I appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it. There's still some cookies and stuff, so please take some with you. Thank you.